Hey everybody, Dr. Shiller here, and I want to talk today in response to a question that a reader sent in because it's so relevant to many people when it comes to the whole idea of healing chronic pain and chronic illness. I want to talk a bit about some of the chronic syndrome that have common underlying issues, why we look at them slightly differently in the functional approach compared to the way a lot of us learned in medical school. And in particular, talk about really the relationship of some of the core physiological imbalances, some of the biology underlying chronic pain and chronic illness. No matter what the issue is, there's this underlying biology. And how does someone like me think about it so you can kind of look at your situation and try to get some insight? And so it's a great question she sent in because it evokes a piece of confusion a lot of people share. And so I want you to hear this and take it in. So that you don't get confused by it. So here's her question. Doc, what are your thoughts about an article that I've read that said that mononucleosis, which is Epstein-Barr virus, and herpes virus can be the cause of fibromyalgia? Look, she has fibromyalgia and chronic pain. What's going on here is very generalizable, though. I'm going to tell you why. So what do you think about that these viruses can cause fibro? And what about the effect of the hysterectomy I had due to bad endometriosis? So if this is an individualized thing, how do I narrow down my own personal cause? And she goes on to say, oh, by the way, I have both bipolar disease and PTSD and panic attacks due to physical emotional abuse. Like, wow, like a heartbreaking, complex situation that is not this person's fault. She has real physiologic illness, and she has a lot of like social emotional trauma going on. She goes on to ask more questions. Doc, what are your thoughts about leaky gut and biofilms? Do I need to diagnose that and treat that? I have irritable bowel syndrome pretty badly. I'm always feeling so drained and lethargic and exhausted. And, you know, it's been really hard because I don't really trust my doctors anymore. A lot of them have treated me like I'm a drug seeker. And, you know, not only do I have fibromyalgia, but I got really bad osteoarthritis. I'm only 45. I've already had a hip replacement. I'm going to have another joint surgery coming up. I hurt so bad every day that I feel like living like this is just not like living life. And so the reason this is relevant to a lot of people, not just with her sort of diagnoses, is because it's a complex picture and her head is spinning around with all the different possibilities of like, what do I do next? And I hear that all the time. It's so confusing. You read all this stuff on the internet and she's talking about biofilms and leaky gut and like, what comes first? What should a person start doing? Yeah. And so what I want to say is that the thing screaming at me from her case is the PTSD and the panic attacks and the fact that she's got like an ongoing, really intense kind of psychiatric illness. And the issues with that are not just relevant to people with psychiatric illness. If you're someone who has had early life trauma or you've had traumatic experiences, or if it's less severe than that, suppose you're just like a normal person who doesn't consider yourself mentally ill, but you actually like noted, yeah, like I had that really tough experience when I was in high school or college when there was that breakup of that really close relationship where I lost the person I loved and cared about, or I was in college and I was abused by my professor, or whatever it was. And right around then, my symptoms started happening. Or maybe it was that car accident that didn't seem so bad, or I had that surgery and then suddenly things started unwinding. Well, this is for you too. Okay, because the thing that's so important is that people frequently overlook the incredible power of the mind-body connection. And I want to flesh this out for you a little bit, okay? So let's start off by looking at some of these slides just to understand, like, how do these syndromes develop? And you'll notice what I've written here, that many chronic debilitating problems share biological imbalances, whether it's chronic pain, fibromyalgia, abdominal pain, and leaky or irritable bowel, like she had, fatigue, depression, anxiety, but also things like migraine, dementia, neurodegenerative disorders, neuropathy, autoimmune disease, chronic fatigue. There are underlying imbalances that drive these diseases, and they show up differently in different people. And part of the problem and challenge of conventional medicine is that they're looking at the disease as the sort of here, the disease will tell us what the problem is, but they're not looking at the kind of person who has the disease and how this disease probably developed based on the more detailed history. And that's what we do in functional medicine. So let's keep going on this here. So we try to identify and treat the underlying biological imbalances that give rise to all these different diseases, as opposed to saying, hey, for this disease, we use this drug. Because that's the approach that often doesn't work for people. And if you have a chronic illness, you may have experienced that yourself. And so identifying the underlying biological imbalance, how do we do that? We think about three things. We think about antecedents, the foundational issues in the person's life or history that set the stage. We think about triggers, transient events that shift the system and create like a different reality. And then mediators, things that keep you stick, persistent underlying physiological imbalances. And so the antecedents and the triggers give us an idea of what the mediators that might be most important are in a given patient. And that's when we start thinking about treatment. So let's keep going and unpack this some more. So antecedents are things like genetics, adverse childhood events, or early life trauma, which can actually turn on the genes of stress and an overactive, hypervigilant mental emotional system that is intimately connected with your immune system, your gut, and everything in your body. Illnesses or exposure, lifestyle, these are early life things that set the stage of who you are biologically, so that when the trigger comes along, and it could be a stressor, an infection, a trauma, or a toxic exposure or a drug exposure, it could be a serious illness, and that creates a shift. And that shift sets up some kind of mediator. It could be a change in the immune system and the kind of onset all the time. Sensitization of the nerves or the brain, what we call central sensitization or peripheral sensitization. Dysfunction in the mitochondria that produce biochemical energy. Imbalance in the autonomic nervous system, which is that stress relaxation balance that you're meant to have. But sometimes, because of various antecedents and triggers, it gets locked into a locked on position. Issues with the gastrointestinal tract and dysbiosis, hyperpermeability, malabsorption, classic things that go on with irritable bowel syndrome. And as you can imagine, all of these mediators can feed into each other. And so it's kind of like a snowball that's going downhill or a river that's flowing downstream. It's kind of gathers energy over time. And that's why you may have had the experience of like, oh yeah, that thing happened. I wasn't feeling too well. It didn't really get better. Or I got something, it got better, but then something else happened. And then like, it's just gotten worse and worse over years. And I hear that every day over and over from almost everybody who shows up with chronic illness and chronic pain. There was some antecedent. There was a trigger. Then there are these mediators that perpetuate and roll downhill like a snowball or flow downstream like a river. And so, regardless of what your diagnosis is, whether it's any of these things, frequently there are antecedents, triggers, and mediators, and these diagnoses are like the outcome. They're like what happens when the actual end organ gets sick, and that's when people tend to have symptoms and go to the doctor. But we know that when a person has a chronic syndrome, it frequently starts a long time before that. There's actually data showing with rheumatologic disease like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus that there's symptom onset, then there's positive lab tests, and then there's when you get a diagnosis, and that can be months or years before you get a diagnosis. And that process is typically going on for a while before the person even has symptoms. So these are processes. They're not discrete events in time. A discrete event in time can trigger the process. So that's part of what's important about understanding it, and part of thinking through in your life, okay, like, what was I like as a kid? Do I have a family history of illnesses or diseases like this? Like, what are my antecedents? What are the triggering events that seem to bring things on and make them worse? And start trying to understand, well, what might the key thing be? Okay, let's keep going. All right. The gut-brain-immune axis. This is just key. You could broaden this, you can add the endocrine system, you can add other aspects of your systems, because all of the systems in your body are one system. But this is a place where the money is frequently. This is a place where the money is in terms of you understanding what the issues are for you and why you stay sick. So we've had a growing development of lots and lots of data over the years showing us these incredible connections between your brain, your gastrointestinal system, and your immune system. And at this point, like every specialty has journal articles and research findings coming out all the time talking about these relationships, whether it's psychiatry journals, rheumatology journals, cardiology journals, in general internal medicine. It's all about this. These are the underlying physiologic things going on, and conventional medicine hasn't had enough time to do enough research to really put all of this stuff together in a way that satisfies, sort of the mainstream advisory boards and collectives that get together and make clinical guidelines, because it's still fuzzy. But there's a lot of underlying science that gives us directions about what to do. And those of us who practice functional medicine are early adopters. We're looking at patients who are otherwise getting sicker and sicker because conventional medicine isn't helping them. And we're saying, okay, we don't have complete data yet. We never will. Not everything that counts can be counted. We do have pictures and patterns that are showing up. And when we do relatively safe lifestyle interventions, the risk-benefit ratio of treatment is pretty good. So let's keep moving through. And let's think a bit more about this issue that people get mixed up on, right? Because this patient in particular was asking me, well, what about what's going on in my gut? Or did I have a viral infection that stimulated my immune system? And the answer is, yeah, those things might be really important, but you've got PTSD, you've got chronic anxiety, you've got panic attacks. That means your stress response is on all the time, saying danger, 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 and that is going to re-stimulate your gut, and it's going to re-stimulate your immune system. Let's unpack this a bit. This is just a progress in neuropharmacology and biological psychiatry, right? This is a graphic of your brain, and here's your gut, and here's a blow up of your intestinal tract showing like the inside. We call this the lumen. And in the lumen here are all the bacteria that make up your biome. You got trillions of bacteria in your gut, and they are not just hanging out there living the life. They are helping you metabolize food. They're producing metabolic products that are circulated into your system and affect all of the tissues, especially your brain. They are modulating and moderating the immune system that's living in the walls of your gut, and that's in turn affecting your entire system. So chronic stress has all these neurologic pathways by which it affects the gut. And it affects the biome and changes the biome. And when the biome changes, for instance, certain shifts in the biome can create toxic metabolites that go to your brain and create anxiety, bipolar disease, panic, depression, and perpetuate that. There's also biochemical pathways like the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, cortisol, also influencing the thyroid axis, that feeds into the gut biome situation. And from there, what's going on in the gut biome and what's going on with the integrity of the wall of your gut feeds into the overactivity of the immune cells that are living around there, and that gets systemic, and they produce pro-inflammatory cytokines, inflammatory chemicals that go to your brain and feed the issues. So this is a loop of interactions between your brain, your gastrointestinal function, your biome, your gut barrier, and the immune function of your entire body. So that's why people are thinking about dysbiosis and leaky gut and biofilms. That's why people are thinking about viral infections as issues or triggers that cause these chronic disease processes, because they set off this system. But that's why you also need to be thinking about your mind-body connection and the balance of your autonomic nervous system. Here's a cartoon that just looks at this like barrier dysfunction, leaky gut, intestinal permeability thing. These are all kind of different words for the same phenomenon depending on who you're talking to. But here's your normal gut. You got these junctions between the cells of your gut that keep the bad stuff inside and absorb the good stuff, so that you absorb nutrients, but you keep the bacteria in your gut and you remove the waste products. So along comes stressors, toxic exposures, infections, various kinds of things, and create change in that biome and create leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And you've got stuff leaking through, and your immune system that surrounds the gut And your vasculature, your blood vessels that surround the gut, are exposed to all sorts of stuff that can be incompletely digested food, that can be bacterial components that generate a big immune response systemically. And that's part of what drives the chronic inflammation that drives chronic illness and chronic pain. I hope you're starting to see the picture. So let's keep going here. The last element of these changes that happens that's so relevant to this particular person who had irritable bowel and fibromyalgia, which often go together, and there's a reason why, and this is it, right? Because that cycle of overactive stress response that affects gut function and dysbiosis and leaky gut and overactivity of the immune response creates peripheral and central sensitization. That means the nerves are overactive. That means everything hurts in your brain. It can also mean brain fog. It can mean more anxiety. It's a neurological overactivity because the brain has too many excitatory chemicals. In the gut, what happens is the actual nerve endings get sensitive, and the actual function of the motor system that makes your gut very carefully move the food along gets either overactive or underactive. You get constipation, diarrhea, constipation, depending on the kind of irritable bowel that you got going on. But that's part of the problem. Stuff's moving through too fast. You're not absorbing nutrients. So what do we do about all this? Well, I've talked about this before, and this is the way I think. I think about these three domains. I call them the 3 M's: mind, movement, metabolism. Mind is your mind-body relationships. It's the fact that between your ears, you have a capacity for free choice. You have a capacity for mobilizing your mindset, your thoughts, for transforming emotions, for actually shifting your physiology. And this is real science. It's not kumbaya, goofy, floofy. It's real physiology of how mind-body training and how mind-body techniques and the right kind of therapeutic tools shift your physiology. Your movement system is your musculoskeletal, neuromuscular nerves, the way that you move in space. Your body was made for movement, and that shifts everything too. Exercise is the best medicine going. You got to just know how to do the right stuff for you. And then your metabolism, like we're talking about, what's going on with the gut, the immune system, the hormone system, the neurotransmitters, all that biochemistry. And there's ways to think about all of these things and treat them with lifestyle. So all right, these are important things, right? Metabolic, biochemical, that's this part, metabolism, right? These are some of the things we work with. Your diet, working with food sensitivities, the right nutrients, low antigen, high polyphenol diet. This is a whole lecture, obviously, just to talk about this, supporting the adrenal system. There's a off-label medication that I use a lot called low-dose naltrexone because it gently shifts the immune system and enhances certain biochemicals that enhance well-being and block pain. And then there's healing the gut. There's ways to treat dysbiosis and leaky gut. There's ways to treat biofilms, which can perpetuate dysbiosis. And then the movement or mechanical system. Movement is medicine. It can be healing. If you're sedentary because of pain, because of joint injury, because of obesity, because every time you do exercise you get wiped out because you've got chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, you need to find a way to exercise that works for you. And I guarantee there is a way. I've worked with so many people who felt like, I can't move, I can't do anything. But then you teach them in the right way how they can learn to move. Start where they are, accept the current limitations, and build and open your envelopes so that you get stronger, more flexible, build your endurance while you're doing these other aspects of healing. And obviously there's aerobic exercise, stretching, strengthening, but most importantly, potentially, especially if you're chronically ill, is mindful movement arts, whether it's yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or Feldenkrais. These are approaches that are really about helping you bring your awareness into your body. So you're actually directly aware. You can bring compassion to yourself. You can learn to move from the inside out, as opposed to some kind of no pain, no gain thing, which just flares you up and makes you worse. Okay, but here's the whole point of this talk. The real thing I want you to take home that's so important is, yeah, we've got all these different issues that give rise to these illnesses, but autonomic imbalance is huge. And people don't like to recognize it. We don't want to think there's something wrong, right? And part of it, I think, is because so many people have been stigmatized, accused, humiliated, and otherwise dismissed. Oh, you're just anxious, blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that your state of calm versus anxiety, your state of autonomic balance or imbalance is fully integrated with the underlying biological processes that give rise and perpetuate your chronic illness and your chronic pain. And if you don't address that, it's just like you're not addressing your gut imbalances or your hormonal imbalances or the fact that you're sedentary or the fact that whatever it is. It's one complete system, and you really need to address the autonomic imbalance. And the good thing is there's ways to do that. There's so many techniques and tools and technologies. Let's talk more about that. And I just want like another little diagram here, right? You have a state of mind and consciousness. It's your mind-body state, and it's the way you are in relation to yourself. And that influences everything. What am I doing? Wrong arrow. It influences your pain pathways. It influences your brain function, your immune function, your cellular energy production, your relationships and roles with people around you, which influences your happiness, which feeds into the whole system. Your motivation and self-care. Like, are you doing things that nourish you and heal you? Or are you doing things that feel good in the moment but actually make you sicker, like eating the wrong food or using substances that create transient feeling good but in the long run feed into your illness process? And then, of course, like your whole gut barrier biomotility, your gut-brain axis is so powerful. And if you're not doing this, you're missing the boat. But on the other hand, when you start to open your mind and start to learn tools, then you're pulling all this stuff together and you can start creating a more healing state. I just want to emphasize this a bit more, that chronic illness, chronic pain, your body believes you're in danger. There are biochemical, physiologic, biological, mental, emotional signals that perpetuate that message. Whether it's life stress, pain, trauma, immune dysfunction, toxin, drugs, acute illness, surgery, or the pandemic crisis that's going on, and all of the social difficult stuff going on, it all creates a sense of, and it creates a vigilance, right? And that vigilance that you might experience mentally and emotionally is, so to speak, being experienced by your cells. And that's part of what recent science is showing us, that our biology has a danger detector. Our immune system has danger detectors. Our mitochondria are danger detectors. And there's a cellular protective response that's kind of like circling the wagons. The cells stop reproducing so much energy. They stop producing as much DNA and protein synthesis, which they need to survive and thrive. There's activation of the immune system, hypervigilance, and decreased cellular communication. And that feeds into the danger response. And it gets stuck there. And the question is, how do you shift that? We treat all the physiology. We get you moving, sleeping, doing all those healthy behaviors that are so important, but there's activating the biochemistry and neurology of safety, and that's your mind-body connection. And one little other thing just to keep in the back of your mind is that your brain's got three sort of functional aspects. These aren't anatomically separate, but they're kind of anatomically different, right? There's your neocortex, which is like your thinking psychological brain. And then there's your limbic system, which is your emotional brain. And then there's your brainstem, which is like your physiologic, cellular influencing brain. And they are so integrated, but there are distinct things that you do to address those different aspects. And so talk therapy like CBT is great. It helps you think better, but it doesn't necessarily get at your limbic system unless your therapist happens to be super talented and also work in things to connect with you on that level. And that doesn't necessarily get into your body unless someone's teaching you some kind of body awareness, body calming, mindfulness, somatic experiencing, EMDR. There's various techniques. Internal family system. There's different tools that you can learn that you can do by yourself, or if you need the help, you get help from someone who helps you work through it and learn how to do it and learn how to hold you in that space so that you can hold your own being in that space of safety. And that sends that cellular signal, and bit by bit, that's how you heal. In my eyes, there's 6 steps to mind-body healing: relaxation, mindfulness, body awareness, insight, like developing your inner map so you understand what's going on in your inner and outer world. There's activating the power of your heart and soul to heal you, but to generate positivity and love and compassion and caring and to actually connect to the higher aspects of your own being, which are there to heal you. And that's part of what transforms you. So this is a huge topic. I'll be talking more about it. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, do it. And you can also sign up to get on the email list so that you're part of my email community, get notified when new posts come out. And, you know, I'm constantly putting stuff out there in terms of mind-body healing, as well as these other aspects of healing. Some of it's free in terms of free sessions we do online. Some of it's more in-depth and more developed and really helps you build skills over time. And so you're invited to keep tuning in. Send your feedback. I'd love to hear it. And I'm wishing you all the best for speedy healing. Take care.